Let's just bring you some breaking news, and reports from the Russian news agency Interfax in the last few minutes say that the former Russian President Mikhail Gorbachev has died. He was 91 years old. He was known for his policy of glasnost and perestroika, opening up the country to the West. He was the eighth and final leader of the Soviet Union. And while he wanted to preserve communism and the history, he certainly believed that reform was necessary in the Soviet Union after what happened at Chernobyl. He was born to a peasant family stock, in fact. As I said, the eighth and final leader of the Soviet Union, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union from 85 until 1991, actually aged 92, apologies. This is the Russian news agency Interfax reporting. He was also the country's head of state from 1988 until 1991. And as I said, he was the man that began the breakup of the Soviet Union, believing in reform, opening the country up to the West. And of course, much of that, one would argue, has been undone by Vladimir Putin, who now wants to restore, if you like, the might of the Soviet Union to power. And certainly he would blame Mikhail Gorbachev for the breakup of the 15 federal parts of the Soviet Union back then. So he died, we're told, in hospital. Let's just get you the detail on that, more detail coming through. In fact, yes, both the TASS and RIA Novosti and Interfax news agencies all citing that he died at the Central Clinical Hospital. And Gorbachev's office said earlier that he was undergoing treatment at that hospital. So all of those Russian news agencies now reporting that this man that caused those seismic changes to the Soviet Union, the former Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev, has died. So the very latest on that, and we'll certainly get much more reaction. As I said, famed for glasnost, perestroika at the end of the 80s. Yes, apologies, his age keeps changing. He's 91, so widely considered one of the most significant figures of the second half of the 20th century. Gorbachev remains the subject, as I said, of controversy for those who believed in the Soviet Union's continuation, the recipient of a wide range of awards, including the Nobel Peace Prize. He was praised for his pivotal role in ending the Cold War, introducing those political freedoms in the Soviet Union and tolerating both the fall of Marxist-Leninist administrations in Eastern and Central Europe. If you remember, this led to the fall of the Berlin Wall as well. And subsequently led to the reunification of Germany, great changes in Eastern and Central Europe, the expansion, fundamentally, you would argue, of the European Union in the decades to follow. And then conversely, he's often derided in Russia itself for accelerating the dissolution of the Soviet Republic, an event which brought a decline in Russia's global influence and precipitated an economic collapse. And as I said, some might argue that what we're witnessing in Ukraine today is undoing some of Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms and Vladimir Putin's ambitions to restore the might of the Soviet Union, as I said, which broke up in those 15 republics. Pictures there, as you can see, of Ronald Reagan. This is all part of the opening up, as I said, the great change that brought about the fall of the Soviet Union. Those pictures, as you can see, the relationship, the close relationship these two men had. And the Nobel Peace Prize winner, you remember those words we heard in the past of Ich bin ein Berliner, the necessity that the Berlin Wall should fall down and that Germany was reunified, all followed the changes that this man brought in, Mikhail Gorbachev, really quite seismic in 20th century global affairs. And as I said, the news agencies across Russia now reporting that he has died after receiving treatment in a central hospital. And many people, no doubt, will pay tribute to the work of Mikhail Gorbachev, certainly in the West, if not in Russia itself. And as I said, derided in many parts there because the Soviet Union, which had been one of the two great superpowers, fell apart after the changes that were begun by Mikhail Gorbachev. Perestroika, glasnost, opening the country to the West and allowing economic change as well. Let's just get a little bit more about that and his relationship with Margaret Thatcher from John Craig. John.
Well, back in 1984, before he became president of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev came to the UK, and Margaret Thatcher famously described him as a man she could do business with. Now, in the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher was very keen to improve relations with the Soviet Union as it was then, and courted Mikhail Gorbachev. She saw him as something of a modernizer. Glasnost, perestroika were the words being used at the time. And as now in 2022, of course, the appalling relations between UK, the rest of Europe and Russia, and war with President Putin in Ukraine. What a difference from the 1980s. There's Mr. Gorbachev alongside President Reagan in the 1980s. And he had a very good relationship with Margaret Thatcher, and later with John Major. I remember a visit that that Gorbachev made to the UK, including a visit to Parliament and the House of Commons. And John Major, I remember, took him round the House of Commons, and I remember being on the House of Commons terrace when John Major took Gorbachev and introduced him to dozens of MPs, backbench MPs, Labour, Conservative. And it was fascinating, and there were quite a few journalists there, obviously, watching and observing what was going on. And he was, I don't know whether it's fair to say that he was possibly the most pro-UK Russian leader of recent times, but certainly in those days, in the 80s and early 90s, relations were so different from what they are now. And there's a photo of Mr. Gorbachev with Margaret Thatcher. I'm not sure what year that is, but he did make a number of visits here to the UK, and relations then were very good, partly because Margaret Thatcher, of course, who was, of course, anxious to bring the Cold War to an end. And one thinks back, you think back to the Thatcher years, 1979 to 1990. I mean, that was the period, of course, when she and other world leaders, like President Reagan, were trying to bring the Cold War to an end. And, of course, in the late 80s, the Berlin Wall came down, and there was an amazing breakthrough. And it was Mr. Gorbachev must take a lot of the credit for that. And I suppose you have to give credit to Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, who, as we know, were ideological soulmates, great allies, in helping bring about the changes in Russia, in the Soviet Union as it then was, and in international relations. So those who were involved at that time, diplomats who worked for Margaret Thatcher, will no doubt will pay a warm tribute to his role. And in his talks with Margaret Thatcher back in the 1980s, and she obviously was perhaps should be credited for spotting his potential before he became the president, courting him back in 1984. I'm old enough to remember that visit, 1984. It was, as I say, it was before he became president, and he was seen very much as the heir apparent, and that's why Margaret Thatcher was so keen to build up good relations with him, and she certainly did. And his role in the ending of the Cold War and a thaw in relations cannot be underestimated. And of course, many people will say how tragic it is that events in the Ukraine and Russia are so terrible now, and that Europe is at war with the leader of what is now the successor to the old Soviet Union.
Yeah, it's an absolutely fascinating part of history, isn't it? 1989, the critical year. John, most of those Marxist-Leninist states of Central and Eastern Europe, began their revolutions, if you like, holding elections, resulting in regime change. Most countries like Poland and Hungary achieved peacefully, but if you remember, Romania and the Ceausescus were overthrown and executed. And then, of course, he visited Germany in 1989 as well. Parts of the wall began being taken down, a decision apparently Gorbachev praised, but really critical part of European history then, the reunification of Germany. And as I said before, this all paves the way for those Eastern European states states to be brought into the fold of the European Union. And it was Ukraine's ambition to be part of the EU which began, if you like, this road with Russia, which has seen the anger of Vladimir Putin. Well, let's bring in our international correspondent now, Alex Rossi, who's worked himself in Russia for many years. Alex, and how will Gorbachev be viewed there? And indeed, how will that contrast with how he's seen here in the West?
Well, I think globally, I think you have to see Gorbachev, Mikhail Gorbachev, he's one of the most significant figures of the 20th century. But within Russia, he holds a controversial position, particularly as we have seen the rise of Vladimir Putin and the direction with which he has taken the country. Remember, Putin himself has called the collapse of the Soviet Union the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, and the architect of that, as far as many people are concerned, was Mikhail Gorbachev. You have to, I think, go back really to his student days. He was very pro-de-Stalinisation around the Khrushchev period to see really how his political ideas were formed. Now, he didn't himself, this is one of the things that's misunderstood about him, he didn't himself want to end the Soviet Union, but what he saw was a country that was sclerotic, particularly after the accident at Chernobyl, where his officials tried to cover up the extent of the disaster. The centrally planned economy of the Soviet mass was losing badly in the face of capitalism. Think of things like the Star Wars program. Think of the ruts that the Soviet Union got itself into in Afghanistan. Now, there are two key concepts, really, that are always associated with Mikhail Gorbachev. One is glasnost, the Russian word for openness, and the other is perestroika, restructuring. What he tried to do was reinvent the Soviet Union, but what actually happened, because, and I think most historians would agree with this, well, because of the inherent contradictions within the system, it kind of all pulled apart, and he was not a strong enough leader to hold it together. Now, I suppose as a counterfactual exercise, if you ask the question, if Vladimir Putin was in the situation of Mikhail Gorbachev, would it have all held together? And historians often point to what was happening in China at the time. It too was falling behind, but what it got was more authoritarianism, but a capitalist system. That didn't happen, as we saw in the Soviet Union. Eventually, all of it pulled apart, with revolutions starting in 1989 in Eastern European countries. And then, of course, we saw the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. But I think he's a fairly controversial figure within Russia. It will be interesting to see what his legacy will be written up there over the coming hours.
As well, sorry. Yes, and Alex, many Russians never forgiving Gorbachev for the turbulence that his reforms unleashed, considering the subsequent plunge in living standards, suggesting that's too high a price to pay for their apparent democracy. But also all of this led to such changes in Europe itself. I mean, you know, the German reunification was pushed through too swiftly, if you like, for Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, for some. But also all those changes that led to the growth of the European Union. And as I suggested, Ukraine wishing to become part of that. And here we are now in 2022.
Yeah, I mean, internally within Russia, the situation, if you can go back to the 1990s, initially there was this sort of sense that they may be arriving in a new sort of corridor of history that would usher in greater freedoms, greater wealth, and there was a good deal of excitement about that. But what they actually ended up with in those early years was a plunge in living standards, as you were saying, a plunge in life expectancy, and gangster capitalism. It was enormously tough for many people, particularly as the Western economists got involved, along with their sort of the Russian politicians that were involved in what was known as shock therapy, this massive transformation of the centrally planned economy to a capitalist system. Now, some people became very, very rich in all of that. We saw, of course, the rise of the oligarchs, but for most people, it was an extraordinarily difficult time. Now, what they found, and this is the key really to understanding the present that we are living in with the rise of Putin's Russia, what they had in Vladimir Putin was a man who was going to restore the pride that people had in the system on a personal level. This is a man who doesn't really drink, is extremely disciplined. The man he took over after all was Boris Yeltsin, who would stagger around embarrassingly for many Russians, drunken on the international stage. And now we see, of course, Putin trying to restore a kind of Soviet Union 2.0, bringing back what he considers the near abroad, the sort of smaller part of the Russian Empire in Ukraine. Now, it's interesting that Mikhail Gorbachev actually made a number of comments about that in 2014, really blaming the West in many ways for exacerbating the tensions that existed there by making things a lot worse. We've heard, of course, that argument made by Vladimir Putin over the years about the expansion of NATO lapping against Russia's borders. Now, that certainly appears to have been Gorbachev's view as well towards the end of his life.